provided to the media and the public media request. So why are we waiting until January to do that? Is there something that you and law enforcement is considering as a part of this, or?
I think two things, Mr. Peacock. First, regardless of the group or how long they're there, whether someone's there for an hour or around the clock like this, laws still apply for public health and public safety. And so should those be violated, then we will enforce those laws. And so that option is still there should it become necessary. But I think the reason why not bring it forward is all of the ordinances that we want to bring forward are not ready yet. And so it's just our recommendation to consider them as a package because they basically deal with the same things, which are free speech and freedom of assembly. And so dealing with those as a package rather than dealing with one specific to camping.
What do you see as being the disadvantage of addressing specifically what I've asked to be put on the agenda on the 28th, which is to discuss the existing proposed draft ordinances? I mean, what would you see as being the disadvantage of doing that right now?
I don't know that there would be a disadvantage, Mr. Peacock. I think it's just context. There is a bigger context when you see all of these things taken together, and we are going to have to consider how Charlotte is impacted by many, many thousands of these rather than the few that are there with Occupy Charlotte. And so that context seems to fit better when we look at all of those ordinances together. But you could lift that one out or any of them out and deal with those. It feels to us context is missing if you do that.
And would yourself as well as the chief believe that by waiting that somehow we're going to avoid some type of tension or conflict?
I can't speak for the chief. I think to date there hasn't been cause. I mean, it's been peaceable. I agree with Mr. Dulin. You know, it is odd that we can't regulate our own space, but at the same time, it is public space. And so until we say otherwise that it's public space that we are going to regulate, they're not doing anything wrong by being there. And so I don't forecast what happens, but it has been different here than it has been in Portland and Oakland and Denver.
Okay. I hope we have peaceable tension, Madam Carter. I think that there is going to be tension. And I think to Mr. Barnes' point, I think everybody here on this dais very respectfully agrees with the First Amendment rights and the right to peacefully assemble. But right now, currently we have ordinances, and just previous conversations with Chief Monroe was that we have ordinances. If you're homeless in the city and you are sleeping horizontally in a public space, you can be arrested. There's 2 feet have to be on the ground. I've asked for Mr. Hagerman to look it up and to research it and get back to me, but we have existing ordinances right now that address that for people that are homeless in our city. I believe that totals a little over 5,000 now in the city and growing. We'll have this discussion. What I've put on the agenda here is to discuss it. It doesn't mean that it can't get referred to a committee. It doesn't mean that it can't get made a decision on in January. I appreciate your argument. These are advantages and disadvantages, but I would warn this council that we are incurring costs right now. The city of Charlotte, this is currently somebody from the Central District that's there, sitting there 24/7. We have property that's being obviously occupied. There's a cost associated with that as well, too, and that'll be part of the debate. But I don't understand the reason that this council would continue to wait. I understand the merits of the entire package, but I believe that we're going to have tension, and I think that we need to address it sooner rather than later. So that's my motion. I respect Mr. Barnes' argument for it.
Real briefly, if I might.
No. I have Councilman Dulin, Howard, and then Barnes.
Right. No, I'll just that's fine. I think we need to talk about it. We don't need to put our heads in the sand. And this is healthy debate. We've got 3 members headed off that I would like to have their counsel and their input on this. And I appreciate it all. And by golly, I mean, the Constitution says folks can assemble, and we ought to make sure they can. But by golly, I'm in charge of that. We're in charge of that property over there, and we need to have control of it in some fashion. Now, Ms. Carter said she wanted things to go through committee in an orderly fashion. Do you have any problem with the manager coming up with these ordinances? Because it's not going to go to a committee. He's going to bring it straight to us.
But we can refer
So,
it to
you know,
committee.
I'd like to talk about it.
Guys.
I'd like to talk about this next 2 weeks from now.
Thank you, Councilman Dulin. Councilman Howard.
I've heard reference a couple times about some proposed language. I haven't seen it one time. I mean,
Mr. Hagerman?
Councilman, hang on.
I'm just making the
Stuff-
point
whole
that,
stuff kicking around.
I'm just
It was
making the point that not only have I not seen it, but that's just another reason why we shouldn't rush this conversation. We're talking about long-term effects on the way that we deal with free speech and the ability to assemble. That's not something we should rush through.
Concur.
Okay. I was just going to say on the ordinance that is out there was the result of a public records request that I hadn't seen until that time. And so it's not something that I'm not even sure the chief had seen it at that point. So it was a working draft coming from the police attorneys. Councilman Barnes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You know, I recognize that there is a cost for what's happening right now. I don't know if there is a price to be paid for free speech and free assembly. Secondly, imagine if Trade and Tryon looked like Oakland or parts of Atlanta or other places in this country that have Rome, other places in this country and the world that have seen very violent reactions to government intervention. Thus far, the protests in Charlotte have been peaceful. I expect that they will continue to be peaceful. We need to be in a position to enact laws and ordinances that will allow our law enforcement to protect this community. I respect freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. I do not like folks tearing up. And that hasn't happened yet. And I don't want to do anything that will lead to that. I think if we look at this where it started, which was the DNC several months ago, the work that Chief Monroe, that Manager Walton, and others are doing has much more to do with our preparation for the DNC than addressing Occupy Charlotte. So what I'm encouraging with my colleague, Mr. Dulin and Mr. Peacock, is that in this particular case, waiting a few months or a couple of months is actually, I think, in the best interest of Charlotte. The last thing I want to do, and this is what happened in Oakland as I understand it, is to set a drop-dead date because of some meeting we have in a couple of weeks and then have a violent reaction to that. There's no need for that, and I don't want to create that environment here in Charlotte. So that's why, again, I'm going to wait for the package solution from the manager.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Barnes.
Call the question.
There has been a motion made and has been seconded. I would agree that you want to be wise in the fights you pick and the time that you choose to try to go into them without having all of the facts that are still apparently being worked out and over that I would assume we should wait to respond and or react to. I would certainly like to take the issue up sooner rather than later, but I wouldn't want to do anything that's premature to what's currently being worked on in terms of a current ordinance with a host of others that are to follow that started back in the spring regarding the DNC. We're turning, I think, one issue into the absolute, and it is not the only issue. We need to make sure that we are operating outside of this one particular issue that is dealing with one's constitutional rights. And in as much as we are saying that we're for that right, it sounds like there's some who are trying to challenge it, but then maybe not. We shall soon see. That said, Mr. Peacock, you have something in closing before the vote.
Yep, I sure do. Mr. Hagerman, wondered if you could get to council a memo back explaining what our current ordinance is as it relates to someone that decides to occupy a space in Charlotte anywhere, whether it be a park bench, whether it be one of our other city-owned facilities, as it relates to that. I'm specifically referencing the brief conversation you and I had before earlier with some reference from what the chief had mentioned, that we have rules as it relates to someone having 2 feet on the ground and being horizontal as opposed to vertical, and the right of the police officers to do something about that. So I'd like to know what the existing laws are as it relates to that. Second thing, Mr. Manager, I'd like to have just a cost breakdown of what we're spending right now for the police service that's there, anticipated cost to repair the grounds ultimately, if this council, or it sounds as though in this case, the future council is going to make a decision whether or not to allow the word camping to be inserted into the ordinance, because that's the critical friction point here I think we're talking about. I realize that our package is coming. I realize it's part of a proper context, but at the end of the day, it's going to reach that type of precipice, and there will be conflict. And I want it to be peaceful conflict, because I think there's a delicate balance here, but I do want to know what the costs are. I think a lot of people are asking those questions in the community. Appreciate that. So just a manager's memo, as well as some updates from Mr. Hagerman. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hagerman, make sure you do bring back two, because I want to know that there should be a clear distinction, I believe, between one who occupies space who may be homeless per se versus somebody who's occupying space that might be protesting per se.
That's right.
Okay. I think there's a clear difference. I could be wrong, but please bring that opinion back. I had something else and it slipped my mind. Hopefully it'll come back in the next 10 years.
Call the question again.
All right, there's been a motion made and properly seconded.
That's good. That was good.
This would be Mr. Peacock's motion that has been made, and it has been seconded by Mr. Dulin. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? All right. That motion fails, and we'll move forward with the ordinance that will be coming forth at some point for us to take a look at in its entirety. All right. Along with the requests that Councilman Peacock has made of management and attorney's office.